Hello, everybody. This is episode 2. My name is Laura Proud.
My name is shadowy Swat.
And we are the Story Seekers. Me and Adam went to Con Dao, which is a small island in Vietnam. There's a very famous prison there. And this was basically the waiting area for lots of prisoners of war. So when we got there, it was really eerie. So as soon as me and Adam got there, all of the Vietnamese people left because it was about to rain. So when we were walking around, we were completely alone. There was like no security there, nowhere.
So
and it was honestly one of the most like eerie places I've ever been. Number one, because in every kind of cell they have mannequins like reenacting the scenes. But when the weather changes and it's really dark and like,
gloomy.
Yeah, it was gloomy. It was raining outside, so we couldn't really go outside much. So we were staying in the building. All the doors were banging because of the wind. It was a really, really spooky place to be. And I've not really had that for a long time.
Did it feel haunted?
It definitely felt haunted. And yeah, just I think that alongside the weather, which is kind of what I will go into in another episode, it just added to the mood, the overall mood of being there. So even if, yes, it is haunted, there are ghosts, and you don't disbelieve people who've seen things, it just gave you a really sad and just strange feeling when you were there. You knew the history of the place after just going around the museum, and also just like, yeah, the overall mood of just being there, it felt really unsettling. Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to mention that because that's probably the most, not scared, I wouldn't say scared, but me and Proudy kind of looked at each other and were like, we can definitely see why people would have stories about this place. And especially, yeah, that moment in the day when we went, we thought, that's really nice because the island itself seems like really romantic when it's rainy. But when you go there, you just kind of get that feeling being right next to the mountains, and then you're looking up and imagining how the prison
and you're in a
felt.
prison, yeah.
So it was, it was a really, really cool place to be. I would definitely recommend if you get the chance to go and see it.
What's the name again?
I can't remember the full name of the prison. I'll have to.
But the location?
In Con Dao.
Con Dao Island.
Yeah.
Right, Laura. Do you want to jump into it?
Let's do it.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about a story that is still a topic of heated debate and spine-chilling fascination. A tale that blurs the line between myth and reality, leaving everyone who hears it wondering if something truly terrifying still lurks in the shadows. Portlock. Portlock was established in Kenai Peninsula in the early 20th century as a cannery, particularly for salmon, and was rich in resources. So the town was flourishing and it was booming and the population kept growing. But in the 1940s, people seemingly abandoned the town overnight. Strange things seemed to plague the area, and as the legend goes, the people residing in Portlock were living peacefully until people started disappearing whenever they ventured in or around the woods. So like the cities, like you've got the port, and then you've got the village, and then right at the back of the village is like, or surrounding it is just woods and forests. So very kind of isolated, because all the villages, like you'll have one village here and then way down the river, whatever, you'll have the next one. So quite
small
isolated.
Population as well.
Very small, yes. So the local people believed that the woods were inhabited by the Nantiinaq. I think that's the right pronunciation. Nantiinaq. A large Bigfoot-like creature.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So Nantinaq are typically described to be similar to the North American Sasquatch, also referred to as Bigfoot. Eyewitnesses and historians describe the creature as being upwards of 8 feet tall and being covered in dark fur with sharp claws capable of ripping mammals with ease. So allegedly in 1931, a man named Andrew Hamlock ventured out into the woods to log some trees. The man was later found with his head caved in, and it was thought that a piece of equipment too heavy for a man to wield had been used.
In the middle of the woods as well.
In the middle of the woods. He's got equipment there, but the one thing that's, I think it was found like a few feet away from him, but I'm guessing with blood or whatever on it. And this thing was impossible for one man or even a few men to pick up. Also, his dogs, unfortunately, were found nearby and they were torn. Over the years, gold prospectors as well as hunters disappeared, and occasionally a body would wash up in the bay with strange bite and claw marks, or worse, they would be beyond recognition. So it is said that abnormally large humanoid footprints had been found in the woods near the carcasses of large animals such as moose. Can you imagine? You know how big a moose is?
Yeah, huge.
It's huge. It's like a dinosaur.
Yeah.
I've never seen one, but I've seen pictures.
I've
and
seen
I'm
pictures,
always
yeah,
like,
I've never been up
how
close.
is that? I always imagine like a deer, but they're so much bigger.
When you think about like really remote forests and things like that, like the level of wildlife is just like out of this world, isn't it? When you think about bears and like you said, moose and things like that, it's crazy how big everything can be.
I don't even know if bears take out moose.
I don't think, I'm not sure.
I mean, they might
try, but I don't think they would.
But anyway, so footprints, human-like, looks like a Bigfoot. The community described themselves as being terrorized by the creatures, and eventually the elders had had enough, and in 1949 they left en masse to towns along the opposite edge of the Kenai Peninsula, and they never returned. Many of the descendants of the families that lived in Portlock still believe that the area is home to the Nantinaq and keep the legend alive. There have been a few documentaries made about this area, and that was called the Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, which follows a scout team exploring the ruins of the abandoned village. Researching Portlock, I must say that it was difficult to fact check all of these stories, and there were a lot of stories, and there aren't really any credible documents to back anything, to my knowledge, to prove that things, actually happened. So why did the people of Portlock abandon the village so suddenly?
It's really strange, isn't it? Like if, one freak accident happens to your family, or you hear about something happening to other people in the woods. I don't know, maybe now, because of the time we live in, I can't imagine even like a small town, everybody being so scared they just left.
Yeah.
But I guess when your whole livelihood means you probably have to go into the woods at some point, whether it's to hunt, to get things, to like manage your whole house, it's probably quite frightening. And then when you think about folklore itself, you hear about people telling stories, and then you don't know how dramatized some of these stories have been.
Especially if
word of mouth.
If you have elders. So, I mean, these people rely on the elders for advice and their opinion, and they believe them wholeheartedly. And if these people are saying, like, no, there's a monster.
Yeah.
But I do have a few answers, though. So what happened to push them to move to surrounding areas? Well, in 1993, the construction of the Alaska Highway officially began. And by 1994, it was complete. The new highway offered better transportation links and took away the need for a port or sea traffic. So people of Portlock moved to towns amongst the opposite edge of the Kenai Peninsula, which were accessible to the highway.
There's like a practical reason for it, possibly, as well.
So without a reason for its existence, the town just withered and died. In recent years, though, the community has considered the possibility of re-establishing Portlock as a village.
Okay, that's nice.
So I think, although I'm not going to say I don't believe, but I am leaning towards people moved away, probably gradually, and then eventually they decided, okay, let's just, all go to bigger cities.
But yeah, like even if there was like, even if we're not talking about like a cryptid or, something that is Bigfoot, if somebody's died in a really horrific way, whether it's to do with an animal or something like that, it's the news travels fast, doesn't it?
While I was researching, a lot of people said there was no actual proof of people washing up.
Okay.
And dead bodies washing up. So there was no actual... And there was a guy that I mentioned, Andrew Kamler. I couldn't actually find any... Because, I mean, that would be a crime. That would have to be investigated.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't find actual documents about that.
Yeah. I think the eerie part of it, though, is just like the fact that everybody moved very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I mean,
together.
Any town... Have you seen those videos online where people come across blocks of houses where people have just up and left for whatever reason, and it's just walking through the houses, breakfast is still on the table, or it's been years, but there's still everything's still there.
Everything's untouched.
Really eerie. I do like, there's a few people on YouTube that do mansions.
Okay.
Where it's a gangster owned a mansion and then he was arrested and the wife left or whatever, and the mansion's just left with everything in it.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Just these people walking through.
And it just, it looks weird, doesn't it? It looks like there's been like an apocalypse or something.
Yeah, I think that's the appeal why people want to go have a look at it. That's
really cool.
Yeah.
I do think there's something quite unnerving about living so remotely like that. I think whether it is, people have been told these folklore, like these tales, word of mouth, like when you're out in the sticks like that, I feel like it adds to, I know we mentioned this last time, but it adds to like the fear. Even if there's not anything there, you're automatically you're going to be scared growing up somewhere like that, or you're going to have your wits about you, or like you said.
It's the same on like living on farms.
Yeah.
If you live on a farm, it's very far. Like you have your community members that are around, but they're still like at least 20 to 25 minutes drive away.
Creepy. I like that though. I like that it's not necessarily been debunked, but it's like
there's other better, like not better reasons, but there's a reason that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the changing times.
Yeah.
That's interesting as well. When I mentioned my story, one of the possibilities or the reasons people had come up with this, well, people said the story I'll tell is like a similar thing, but it was because times had changed so drastically. Interesting that you've mentioned somewhere so rural as well. So like, I know in the last podcast we spoke about places that we've both been, and this one is a place that I have been, but not specifically to this area. My story, the focus is going to take us to the sea.
Okay.
A place which has given humans much to think about, and it still harbours like a lot of mystery. We know actually so much more about deep space than we do about the ocean.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to be a bit of a Scrooge with this story because I don't necessarily believe it, but I really appreciate the story and kind of like how history's changed. And I really like folklore in general. I just think it's a really nice way of passing on stories or
me too. I absolutely love it's mostly like you said, warning children, making sure like what are you gonna tell your kids? Don't go running in the woods, or there's a Sasquatch.
Yeah, there's a Sasquatch living there. A question I did want to ask you, maybe we can come back to this at a later date, just before I start. It's probably quite hard to think about on the spot now, but do you have any folklore, like from South Africa, focused on the sea?
I know Cape Town, we used to be called the Cape of Storms, and there's a pirate ship or a ship,
that's cool,
like an old school ship that can sometimes apparently be seen. So there's like haunted ships, basically.
That's really cool.
I think
like that.
there was a movie made out of it.
It's just interesting because like where I live back in the UK, I'm not anywhere near the sea really. Probably a 40-minute drive to a very typical seaside town in the UK, and it's not at all like the place I'm going to talk about. So we're going
I
to.
would say we probably have like, I'm gonna have to research it, but they're probably like a mermaid
Yeah,
kind of thing. I'm sure of it. I'm sure they
I would have
be.
thought so. Especially like I don't know. I just
Because
feel like in
there's
South
a lot
Africa
of
it
like
would.
rocks and stuff in our oceans. It's like in our coastal line. It's very rocky. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, it's
I'm
like
very
untamed.
sure that there's a story about like either a sea creature or a mermaid.
Yeah,
There were so many ships that would wreck in that area,
yeah.
and I'm sure people tried to like come up with reasons.
Yeah, and it's like we said before, it's easy to, even if it's not true, like it's easy to think about a story when you're in that kind of setting. And again, to warn people against the dangers of the sea. Like our seaside towns back in the UK, they're either very, very remote or they're very touristy and they don't look
I can also imagine
good.
like if it's folklore, especially people that were on ships and you're at sea for a long time and then you hit land, you go out to the bar, go for a few drinks, people ask you if you have any stories. You're gonna make up a few stories.
Absolutely,
And
yes. Yeah. You're on
people are
land
gonna,
for a short time.
yeah. And then the next guy comes and the bartender asks him like, did you hear? And then he'll make up another story,
Yeah.
and that's how something's just made up.
Yeah. I just think
Created.
as well, like whether you're on a ship or whether you live by the sea, which is like the people I'm going to talk about, I think there's just something really, I'm trying to think of a word, but it's like it's almost awesome. Like living close to the sea or being on the sea, it's so untamed, and I mean it's
Dangerous.
something. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's something I'd like to do, but I know you can't just pop on a boat and put yourself in the middle of the sea. I think it's really, I really admire people who do it. It's so
The
like
idea
so
just
scary.
creeps me out. Yeah.
Yeah.
We should ask Sarah
Yeah.
because
She
she's
has
been, yeah.
I bet she does. She does.
I hope she does. But our friend Sarah, she works on cruises sometimes.
Yeah. I reckon so. I reckon she's got a story to tell. The story takes us to the sea. Takes place in the remote coast of Scotland, in particular the Orkney area of Scotland. But don't come for me if people do listen to this. I know like there have been sightings up and down. Well, there've been sightings in a lot of places, but in particular Scotland and Ireland. So, but my story, the retelling of my story in particular, is from Scotland.
Please, no one come for us.
No,
Not with pronunciation
No.
or anything, please.
Similar to South Africa, I think like when you visit Scotland, you become mesmerized by. I wrote down like the imposing landscape. It's so like it just takes your breath away. You can be at one moment in the middle of a forest, driving through the forest, and then you're out on this lane where it's like these huge Jurassic rocks, and then suddenly by the ocean it changes really dramatically.
Have you been to Scotland?
I have, so
I would. That's like on the top of my bucket
Yeah.
list. I would love.
it's
to
it's
go.
definitely one of my favorite places, favorite countries I've ever been to. I've been going since I was a kid. My great grandparents on my dad's side, they're Scottish.
Okay.
So my dad spent a lot of his childhood in Scotland as well. So I've heard lots of stories from my dad, especially about myths and legends of Scotland, which is nice. Loch Ness Monster and like the very typical ones. So we've camped there a lot as kids.
Nessie.
Yeah.
Love to see her.
Yeah, so
Can
would
you
I.
imagine?
Yeah. And even that, the story itself to me is so fantastic. Like it's just
Literally fantastic. Yeah.
it's unbelievable. But when you actually go and see the loch and see the size, and like on our day in Vietnam today is very rainy, very gloomy. But if you go on like a gloomy or rainy day in Scotland, it makes it even more eerie. And you can see why people, when they're alone, they might think they see something, or whether they do
I
or
can
not.
imagine. Yeah.
It's really kind of imposing. Yeah, I've been there as a kid, camping, getting lost in the woods, and staying in lots of places that were completely rugged. A big thing in Scotland, if we ever get the chance to go together, you can stay and camp in bothies, which is just an abandoned house.
Oh, yes, please.
They have a few up and down the country.
That would be really cool.
Because wild camping, I don't know whether this is still true.
I think I've heard of this. Isn't it while you're driving and you get like really tired, you can just hop in?
Yeah. I don't think it's for long term, but you are wild camping in Scotland. In the UK, you're not allowed to. You have to go to a campsite, but in Scotland, you're basically allowed to camp wherever you can, as long as it's safe.
Yeah.
That could be wrong now. Times could have changed, but like as long as it's safe and you clean up after yourself, the laws are pretty relaxed with wild camping, but they have up and down the country. When we did the North Coast 500, they have a lot of bodies. So it's just basically the shell of a house, like an old stone house. And a lot of people will take their camping gear, especially when the weather is really bad, and just camp inside. So there's a lot of spooky stories about bodies too. I'd like to tell.
We should do that if that's still a thing. We should do that.
Yeah, last time I was in Scotland last time I was in Scotland was when I went back to the UK, but the last time I was there for a long period of time was into 2016, and that's where me and Adam were engaged. So Scotland's got like a big bit more of a charm for me. And we were engaged, ironically, in the middle of nowhere by the sea, not the place I'm going to talk about. But it definitely adds to the charm of Scotland for me, and I can understand the stories. So doing the North Coast 500 is really special. I've been camping so many times before in Scotland and in the UK, and like rugged camping as a kid as well, like not just, glamping or something now, like like really
roast the marshmallows
out in the sticks. So when you're doing the North Coast 500, you're in places where you like genuinely, I have never seen darkness like it. Like you feel completely alone.
Can't see your hand in front of your face.
There was only 2 times we stayed in like an actual campsite, and the rest of the time it was like dark black.
Dear.
So
who
me,
was it?
Adam, and then 2 friends from back home, our friends Matt and Yaz. When I was looking into this story, I can completely understand why people would find particularly the ocean being close to the ocean quite isolating. It's kind of like the mountains and everything that loom down on you and just make you feel very small. So because of this, I kind of wanted to talk about Scotland. And you do get like the typical folk tales, like the Loch Ness Monster, and lots of sprites and fairies in particular. If you go to places like the Outer Hebrides and places like that, there's lots of talk about fairies. But I kind of wanted to look into something I don't know a lot about. I'm going into the story of a selkie. So a selkie or a silkie, as Scottish people call them, are often depicted as beautiful human beings who spend most of their time in the ocean as a seal, most of their life in the ocean as a seal. These beautiful humans are able to take off their seal skin and come onto the shore during Beltane, which is a Gaelic May Day festival, and this marks the beginning of the summer, like our summer celebration. The term selkie comes from the Scottish word for seal, silkie. These stories are often associated with very remote regions of Scotland, and in particular Orkney, which is where my story is from, and the Shetland Isles. Myth is a sacred tale that explains man's experience. And I thought about this when people are looking out at the ocean. It's really nice. So even if you can't explain something, especially if you're on your own or somewhere really remote, you can it almost makes sense of something that's been weird to you. Like, so if something you've seen has just not been normal, maybe even by making a story or something not being necessarily true, it kind of makes more sense to you in that way. Like if you think about the Loch Ness Monster, you don't think about what else it could be. You think, okay, it's a monster that's been living there for thousands of years, and it almost makes it seem easier to understand, which I kind of liked. So the story of the Selkie wife is the one I'm going to tell today.
Okay.
It's the most common legend by far when we think about Selkies, and it's so popular that this tale doesn't just relate to the Scottish Selkies, it's even made its way to the Faroe Islands and Norway. The story goes like this. One night, a young fisherman finds his way down to a small cove and catches a glimpse of something strange happening as he ventures there. As he creeps up behind a rock and cannot comprehend what he sees, the entire sight is captivating. There, a group of women, dancing, celebrating, and ironically, not wearing any clothing.
Lucky him.
The only thing with them laying strewn on the ground were coats of seal skin, which had been discarded quickly. The man believed there to be something otherworldly about these women and kept himself hidden. There was one girl in particular that the man couldn't take his eyes off. The fisherman waited and watched the dancing continue. When it was over, the Selkie folk wandered back to where their seal skins were laid out, slipping them on and disappearing into the waves one by one. One girl is last to approach her skin, looking around frantically. Terror starts to set in her face, and she searches the rocks for any sign of her strange sealskin coat. By this point the sun was rising, and without the ability to return to the sea, she started to panic. The fisherman couldn't stand the idea of never seeing this woman again, and with that he stole her skin and hid it.
Bastard.
I know, awful. The girl started to cry, because without her sealskin she could never again go beneath the waves, and that's when the fisherman came and comforted her. He put his jacket around her and took her home to look after her. The fisherman and the Selkie wife were married and had a family of 2 bairns, which is the Scottish word for children. The fisherman loved her, and she dearly loved her bairns, but she never loved the fisherman.
Oh.
He cared for her, but her true love and her true home was the sea.
Why do I feel like he's an old man?
Yeah, I got that vibe when I was reading this. I was like, ooh. One day, when the fisherman was off working on the croft, her 2 bairns had been playing in the barn, and they ran to show their mam the seal skin they'd found hidden up in the beams of the roof. With that, she took the seal skin and smiled, and the bairns both said they'd never seen their mother look as happy as in that moment. She looked down at them both, hugged them tightly, and ran all the way down to the sea. The fisherman, who was returning from work, saw her running down the hill, holding onto the skin, and he realised he'd been found out. He realised what was about to happen and chased her to the edge of the cove. When he got there, he was just in time to watch as, without a second glance, she slipped on the sealskin and dove again into the waves to return to her home once more.
Bye, kids.
He never again saw her, but any time the children were down by the shoreline, a curious seal could be seen bobbing away in the distance, and the family were never short, and the fishery was always plentiful.
Just abandoned her children.
Yeah. So yeah, like I wrote after this, like the story could definitely be pulled apart by feminists, because it's like
100%.
very typical man watching naked women dancing, thinks they're really like sexual beings, then he's like, right, okay, I'm going to have one of those as my wife. And also I have to say, like, there are other stories of folklore and myths surrounding Selkies, and it's not just women. And it's beautiful humans. So there's like there's one called the Silkie of 𝑠ℎ𝑎𝑟𝑒𝑑, I think that's what it's called, and that's a male Selkie, and he marries a woman
girl.
But again, like, it's one of those things.
I've actually
they always
never
seek
heard...
out human company. Like, why would they do that? So that was a bit of a strange one for me.
I've never actually heard of this. I mean, you know, mermaids and there's sirens, but I've never actually heard of the sealskin one. That's quite interesting.
And like when
it's a nice layer of fat on that.
Yeah, I just thought it was a really nice image. And then, like, kind of when I was looking into this, you'll appreciate like some of the artwork that's like been made, and like old stamps and things like that.
Sketches as well.
Yeah, and it's really, really nice to look at.
I'll definitely look into that.
But yeah, I just wrote, the story essentially, it could be pulled apart by a lot of people, and it has been, because it involves entrapment and then abandonment of her kids. It's just, it's a really, you can tell it's very niche. It's not mermaids, it's not sirens, but it's very specific to that part of Scotland, which used to be huge for, I later found out, like, it used to be a area where seal hunting and like the culling of seal skin was massive. And
that kind of makes sense for why this folklore kind of started, especially because they were taking the skin
and like, before I get into the sightings, which aren't many, and they're all pretty much the same thing, one of the legends of this particular area is if people were doing that, they were killing seals, but there was a lot of superstition around it. Like if you kill a seal and take its skin, it brings you bad luck. And there's a few other Selkie stories that kind of go into this topic more. There was one I read. Basically, this guy had taken a seal skin and he was dragged into the ocean, and he goes down to this like mythical kind of dwelling where all of the seals live, and they show him like how they live, which was really cool. But it all revolves like, it seems to go back to hunting and like big superstition on hunting.
I remember we were somewhere in Cape Town visiting Peter's family, and I remember we were walking on a beach, but it was a very, very rocky beach, like no real sand, also not a big beach, but we were walking along the line and there were these big rocks, and one of Peter's nephews was jumping from rock to rock, and he almost jumped down, and he almost jumped on a dead seal.
Oh God.
And it had been there for a while.
Yeah.
So we just kept imagining up. Luckily he didn't, but he almost did because he thought it was a rock. He almost jumped on it, and we just kept thinking if he did jump on it, he would have gone straight through it.
Yeah. Oh, traumatizing for a kid.
Yeah, can you imagine how traumatizing that would be? But it was, yeah.
It's a really big, like, in the UK, that like they're so elusive. I don't know how bad it is in Scotland, but areas where you can do seal tours, they are really like almost like the mysterious animals in general, because they are really elusive. Like you don't see them very often at all, maybe from a distance, but you don't see them ever really up close. And after I like gone into like a bit of research about the seal hunting, I didn't even realize seal hunting was only banned in Scotland in 2011, I think it was. But you can understand people have passed these stories down, and it's definitely added to the superstition. Obviously fishermen and certain people who do like hunt and cull the seal skin, I guess they don't always care about that, but you just know, living in a remote region or a remote place like that, like you said earlier, your neighbour's not close. But yeah, like I mentioned, it's really hard to find first-hand sightings of them. There's some mention when I went onto some online platforms about people seeing heads bobbing or the head of seals bobbing in the distance, but obviously it could be a seal. A lot of these sightings, there was one that made its way to the newspaper, and it was a schoolmaster in the 1950s, a schoolmaster in the Shetland Isles. He said he'd seen people on the beach, and he'd seen somebody taking a coat and going into the ocean, and then this person never came out again.
Oh wow.
But it made its way to the newspaper. But what many historians now think, they assume the sightings were often Eskimo kayakers in sealskin canoes that had been travelling down to Scotland from remote Arctic Norway. This tribe in particular were called the Sea Sami. They're now extinct, but they were a nomadic tribe of hunter-gatherers that used Eskimo kayaks to hunt and fish. And one of the funny things I heard about this is you have to imagine that these sightings would have been really strange to people in like the middle of nowhere in Scotland, because the sealskin kayak would get waterlogged, and it would look really strange to people because it looked like it was just like not a boat, essentially. Yes. It was like floppy. So it probably looked like someone's skin that they were sat in. Maybe people, came to the beach, maybe they danced, or maybe they came and rested for a while and then got back into their kayak and left. But when you live in somewhere that remote, it's easy to assume something is completely correct, like what you've seen. But yeah, no matter what you believe, I liked the first quote I said about the myth being something that can explain man's experience. And I think even if you don't believe in selkies or you just enjoy the stories, it's good to see how far we've come. And then I liked this last one. I'll just end on this. So there are 3 sorts of people: those who are alive, those who are dead, and those who are at sea. And this quote came from an old sea shanty, and it really stuck with me. I can just imagine lots of pirates singing that song. Like,
yes,
people who are alive, dead, and then the ones who are at sea and they're like in the middle, like in limbo.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that was a good story seeking.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We've been Story Seekers.
See you next time.
See you next time.